In this country, children are working, and you'll be shocked by what comes next. The scenario I'm about to show you is devastating. We're talking about fast fashion factories in Bangladesh, where boys and girls, some still with faces of pure innocence, find themselves trapped in an exhausting work routine, producing clothes that reach storefronts all over the world. But what these children face on a daily basis is something few can imagine. Get ready to learn the dark reality behind the labels we wear every day. Join us, and let's go. The sun has barely risen in Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh, and the streets are already buzzing with activity. Among hurried adults, small silhouettes move with purpose. They are children on their way to work, not to school as one would expect, but to the numerous factories that dot the urban landscape. Bangladesh, a South Asian country with over 160 million inhabitants, has become in recent decades the epicenter of cheap clothing production. Supplies Western stores. The phenomenon known as fast fashion has radically transformed not only the fashion market, but also the lives of millions of workers in this country. In the outskirts of Dhaka, among narrow alleys and precarious buildings, stands an immense industrial complex. Inside, the deafening noise of sewing machines in non-stop operation mingles with the buzz of voices, many of them childless. It's in this scenario that we find Amina, a girl of only 12 years old. I started working here 2 years ago, she says, without taking her eyes off the sewing machine. My family needs the money I earn. It's not much, but it helps buy food and medicine for my sick grandmother. Amina's story is not the exception, but the rule. It's estimated that over 3 million people work in Bangladesh's textile industry, and a significant portion of this contingent is made up of minors. Officially, child labor is prohibited in the country, but the reality in the factories tells another story. The work environment is oppressive. The heat is suffocating. The air is loaded with fabric particles, and shifts extend for 12, sometimes 14 hours daily. Children, with their bodies still developing, are particularly vulnerable to the health risks imposed by these conditions. I often have back and eye pain, confesses Rashid, 14-year-old boy who works in another section of the factory, but I can't miss work. By miss, it's deducted from my salary, and my family needs every taka, the local currency, I earn. The fast fashion industry operates under a relentless logic of mass production and minimal costs. Large Western brands pressure suppliers for ever lower prices, who in turn pass this pressure on to workers at the base of the production chain. Result is a vicious cycle of exploitation. Wages remain extremely low, often below the minimum necessary for a dignified life, and working conditions remain precarious, despite protests from human rights and labor organizations. Now I want to know from you, are you already subscribed to our channel? If not, take the opportunity now to subscribe and stay on top of the biggest curiosities of our world. Well, now that you've done that, let's go. But not everything is shadows in this picture. In recent years, after tragedies such as the collapse of the Rana Plaza building in 2013, which killed over 1,100 workers, there has been an increase in international pressure for improvements. Some factories have implemented stricter safety measures and welfare programs for employees. However, the problem of child labor persists, often in a veiled form. Children are frequently registered with falsified ages or simply don't appear in official records. It's a complex issue, explains Fatima, a local child rights activist. We can't simply close the factories or prohibit children from working without offering alternative. Many families depend on this income to survive. The solution, according to experts, involves a multifaceted approach. It's necessary to strengthen labor inspection, increase investments in education, and create support programs for families in vulnerable situations. At the same time, consumers in Western countries have a crucial role to play. The demand for increasingly cheap and disposable clothing directly fuels the cycle of exploitation. Every piece of clothing has a story, Fatima emphasizes. When we buy a t-shirt for a few dollars, we rarely think about the hands that sewed it, but we should. Fast fashion industry not only exploits child labor, but also causes severe environmental damage. The rivers of Bangladesh, once clear, are now among the most polluted in the world due to toxic waste dumped by textile factories. The Biriganga River, which cuts through Dhaka, is a glaring example. Its waters, once a source of life for riverside communities, now emit a putrid odor and have a coloration that varies between black and fluorescent tones, depending on the dyes used in the factory. The river is dead, laments Mohammed, a local fisherman. There are no more fish. We can't use the water even to wash clothes. It's as if they had poisoned our mother. The impacts on the population's health are alarming. Skin diseases, respiratory problems, and cancers have become epidemic in communities close to industrial zones. Children, again, are the most affected. My daughter is only 6 years old and already suffers from chronic asthma, says Fatima, a resident of a slum on the banks of the Buriganga. The doctor says it's because of the pollution, but we have nowhere to go. The textile industry accounts for about 80% of Bangladesh's export, making the country highly dependent on this sector. This creates a dilemma for authorities: how to balance economic growth with the protection of human rights and the environment. Some promising initiatives are beginning to emerge. Certain international brands, pressured by conscious consumers, are implementing traceability programs in their supply chain. This allows for the identification and correction of labor and environmental violations. Additionally, non-governmental organizations work on the ground to offer alternatives to children. Non-formal education and vocational training projects seek to break the cycle of poverty without resorting to child labor. Our dream is to see all children in Bangladesh in school, not in factory. Says Reza, coordinator of one of these projects. But it's a daily struggle against poverty and a global economic system that doesn't always value human lives. As the sun sets over Dhaka, Amina and thousands of other children finally leave the factories, exhausted after another long day of work. Their young faces carry a premature seriousness, reflecting responsibilities that no child should have. The streets of Dhaka seem an endless maze of narrow alleys and precarious buildings. Among them are several industrial structures, the textile factories that make Bangladesh the second largest exporter of clothes in the world. But behind these imposing facades lies a dark reality. Since the Rana Plaza tragedy in 2013, when the collapse of an industrial complex killed more than 1,100 workers, access to these factories has become extremely restricted. Owners fear negative exposure and possible international repercussions. After days of negotiation, we gained permission to visit one of the floors of one of these factories. The environment is suffocating. The air heavy with fabric particles, the oppressive heat, the deafening noise of machines. Endless rows of workers, mostly young women, bend over sewing machines. Most of these workers come from rural areas, the poorest regions of the country, explains a factory representative. They leave their families very young, attracted by the promise of a regular salary. But this salary is laughable by global standards. About 0.20 euros per hour, one of the lowest in the world, and the human cost is incalculable. Our eyes are drawn to the other side of the warehouse, where we notice smaller silhouettes among the workers. They are children, some appearing to be no more than 10 or 11 years old. When we try to approach, we are gently but firmly directed to another area. There are children working there, our interpreter whispers, but they don't want us to see. We leave the factory with a feeling of powerlessness and indignation. But our mission is far from over. We want to hear the stories of these children, understand their realities beyond the factory walls. After days of searching, with the help of a local social worker, we meet Jui, a 12-year-old girl who has been working for months in one of these factories. She welcomes us to her home, a tiny room in one of Dhaka's countless slums. The space is tight, clean, and organized. A bed elevated by bricks occupies almost the entire room. It's to prevent water from coming in when it rains heavily, Yui explains. She shares this space with her parents and 2 younger siblings. With surprising maturity for her age, Jui tells us her story. I had to leave school when I was in 5th grade. My mother had a lot of debts. I was so happy in school. I had many friends. I miss that. Her eyes shine when she talks about her dream. I wanted to be a doctor, but now I know that won't happen. So I work in the factory so my younger sister can study and fulfill that dream for me. The resignation in her voice is heartbreaking. At just 12 years old, Jui has already learned to give up her dreams, to accept a future she didn't choose. But not all stories end like this. In another part of Dhaka, we visit a center called Happy Home, run by the humanitarian organization Action Aid. Here, children rescued from the streets and factories find a safe haven. Noor, a 10-year-old girl, proudly shows us a drawing she made. This is me, and this is my friend who helps me from afar, she explains, pointing to 2 smiling stick figures. Sanjita, one of Action Aid's coordinators, explains, this isn't just a drawing, it's confidence. It's a bond. Through the long-distance adoption program, these children not only receive material help but also emotional support. They know that someone, even far away, cares about. Contrast between Jui's resigned look and Meme's radiant smile is striking. It's the difference between a stolen childhood and a rescued childhood. The reality of the fast fashion industry in Bangladesh is complex and often disheartening. Changing the entire system seems an impossible task. Long-distance adoption programs and initiatives like Happy Home offer a real alternative to child labor. Now I want to recommend a super special video for you. So, go ahead and click on that video that's appearing on the screen. Well, that's it. And until next time, curious one.